Let me just start with you. I mean, who among us hasn't lost a peace prize and demanded an island?
Well, Trump is being very transparent about what he wants here, and he did the same in Venezuela. In Venezuela, he said this was about oil, and with Greenland, he's saying this is a personal grievance for which I am threatening military action. And he's basically playing risk because people hurt his feelings, or people ostensibly hurt his feelings. So I am appreciative that the president is being transparent about this. I would love it if he was more transparent about the human sex trafficking network that he was a part of, but you can't win them all.
Cameron's grateful that the president is being transparent about the Nobel Peace Prize and his desires for Greenland. Scott, what do you think about that?
You going to let that sit? Are we going to claim here on CNN that the president is part of a global sex trafficking ring? Or,
well,
I mean,
we're going to talk about the Epstein file. Scott, I will do the fact checking as we go along here. Repeat what you said about the global sex trafficking ring.
That Donald Trump was provably very involved with it.
Okay, we'll get to that later. I mean, Donald Trump has never been charged with any crimes in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. But
let's be adults here.
We'll talk about Epstein
let's
files
be serious.
later. Satisfied? Now answer the question about Greenland. Do you think the president's desire now for Greenland in his text to the Norwegian prime minister reveals perhaps something about Donald Trump?
Well, it is true that the government of Norway doesn't award the Nobel Peace Prize. That's true. It's also true that he would very much like to get one. It's also true that he probably deserves one. So all of those things are true. I also think that he very much wants Greenland for national security reasons. He has stated this time and again. He's worried about Russia. He's worried about China. He's worried about protecting this island. It is a vital area. They have critical minerals. We already have a military base there. We're already obligated to protect it anyway. He doesn't believe that Denmark can adequately protect it. So he's got an idea that it would be better under U.S. control. So did Harry S. Truman. So did Secretary of State William Seward. This has been an island that has been recognized by American presidents and diplomats for 150 years that it would be a good idea for us to control. We bought stuff from Denmark before, the Virgin Islands, so it's not unusual for us to engage in these kinds of transactions. Whether this text exchange helps him get to a deal to buy it, I don't know. I want him to be able to buy it. I think the best way to get it is to buy it.
Lee, why bring up Greenland then? I mean, why bring up the Nobel Peace Prize? If it's about this well-thought-out, Truman-esque process, as Scott is suggesting, to get the island, why say, and I was snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize?
First of all, Donald Trump is being transparent about what he wants. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize because he wants what he wants when he wants it. He's being a brat. And as a mother, I'm telling you, this is a boy that's never been told no. And this doesn't belong to you. To Scott, I would say Greenland's not for sale. That's nice that America wants to buy it. They have said, we're not for sale. We do not want to be bought. The people in Denmark are saying, we're not selling it. So I don't know why we keep talking about it like America's the biggest boy in the room and we have the most money and we'll come in here and take it. And I would also say, if it is for sale, where are they getting the $700 billion they're suggesting they're buying it from? Because that would come from the American taxpayer. And we want things like healthcare and education and new roads and bridges and those kind of things. And we're going to spend, $700 billion to buy an island that isn't for sale? I think it's ludicrous. I think we're acting like the biggest brat. We look terrible on the world stage. And if you're part of NATO and then you start acting like you're not going to back up NATO, you're going to actually take things from them, then it makes us look terrible. And it's just poor leadership.
Talk about the world stage, Suzanne.
Yeah, look, nobody is in disagreement that Greenland is a strategic island, that we have interests there, that the protection of U.S. and European national security is implicated in Greenland. But we have all the access we need. I mean, the reason we did a deal with Denmark to put bases there, to put U.S. troops there, is because they recognize that. And they're willing to expand that deal, to renegotiate it, to give the U.S. the rights that it may need to implement if Trump wants to and is able to, a version of the Iron Dome that would protect the United States and North America. So the idea that we have to have complete control, he's admitted it's a psychological need that he has, not a need that is driven by U.S. national interest. He said that to a New York Times reporter. And so the cost that this is exacting, extorting the Europeans, threatening to impose these tariffs that now have Europe on edge, looking at a complete withdrawal and breakdown of the NATO alliance, the most successful alliance in world history that has lasted for, now nearly 80 years. That is an appalling cost to price to pay for the American people for a kind of flight of fancy that's ego-driven. He admits that. I think it's great he's owned up to it because we can then size him up. But the Nobel Peace Prize is not a participation trophy. This is not, something that you're entitled to because you stomp your feet.
And just one last thing on the Nobel Prize. This is what he told NBC today. Of course, even after Norway told him they're not the ones who pick it. Norway totally controls it despite what they say, he told NBC News. They like to say they have nothing to do with it, but they have everything to do with it, the president added. And then he goes on to say, I don't care about the Nobel Prize. It's a pretty strange way of saying you don't care.
John, I would agree with the president. He, quite frankly, doesn't care about the Nobel Peace
What
Prize.
evidence do you have? Is there any evidence you have?
I do.
I do. Wait a second. We all were quiet when everyone was talking. If he did care so much about it, he would have stopped on this 8 times victory that he's had in playing in global affairs and stopping conflicts around the world. I know some people at this table may not agree, but the president has, in fact, utilized his place as a leader of the free world to stop conflicts around the world. And I would disagree with the point you made earlier. We just heard 2 people at this table refer to the president as a brat and conflated him removing a murderous dictator, which hundreds of thousands of people from Venezuela who call America home now cheered on and agreed with. That's what we just conflated what the president is doing, which I agree with Scott, is a national security, as you said yourself, strategic move. And if we don't get it, our near-peer enemies, Russia and China, absolutely have the same exact thought in mind that they want Greenland. I think the president doesn't care about this Nobel Peace Prize business.
He just said he's the one who wrote. If he doesn't care about it, why did he bring it up? If he didn't care about it, why did he write the Norwegian prime minister and say, I'm linking the Nobel Prize to my desire for Greenland?
States, and I'll remind you, is the first president of the United States in contemporary history to not put us into a long-term land conflict around the world, and has played in 8 different conflicts around the world as his position leader of the free world and stopped conflicts from around the world. So I don't think he cares as much as he's saying, sure, I'm deserving because I've done things more than what people have done and gotten it for much less.
Wait, so if Russia is one of our enemies, do you agree with the president's decision to invite Vladimir Putin onto the peace board for Gaza?
So now you don't want the president to negotiate.
That's not what he said. He asked you a question
What
about
on
Russia.
earth are you talking about? Do you believe that Vladimir Putin, a war criminal like Netanyahu and Trump, should be on the peace board for Gaza?
I'm not going to dignify that with an answer. You're conflating world leaders.
Well, because you don't have an answer,
Why not?
sir.
Of course I do have an answer,
Well,
but
let me
that's
hear it.
ridiculous. To conflate the things that you're talking about into one bucket is absolutely ridiculous, and it's not deserving of
It's
a
what it is
dignified
a bucket.
answer.
It's called
The
war
larger
criminals.
question is really whether there's a strategic interest to be so heavy-handed to put the NATO alliance at risk for U.S. domination over this territory when we have a long history of working with the Danes, working with the Europeans to use the territory as needed. They've said, we're open to what else may be needed, what you may need to base or headquarter there, what technologies you may need to bring in. So why disrupt the whole global order in order to get single-handed U.S. control when it's clear the Greenlanders don't want that, the Europeans don't want that, the rest of the world sees that as an incredibly intrusive, disruptive move that undercuts the rule of law and the norm against the use of force. So, you know, what is the purpose? What can be achieved by kind of blowing up the whole system just to get single-handed control? There isn't a logic there.
One of the things that the Wall Street Journal was reporting earlier is that the vice president did host all of these countries that are involved, and they had a healthy conversation. They created a working group to talk about this. I think if the president does go after the island, he will utilize, it's my hope that he will utilize all of the correct avenues and approach with NATO and members of Congress and those types of things. Look, I'll be honest, in my opinion, I don't agree with weaponizing terrorists for this purpose. I don't agree with that. But I think the president will use the diplomatic channels and the proper ways about going acquiring Greenland when the time comes.
You know, no one's actually objecting to that. I mean, I think everyone's saying,
Well, I
look,
think
if
there's
there
two
can
people
be
at
a
this table who are
negotiation,
absolutely neglecting
if there can be a give and take, if we can come to terms with the Danes and we need greater access, you know, so be it. And the Europeans
That would be
keep
diplomacy,
repeating
which
that.
I think I would be totally for. What we're doing here now is not diplomacy.
Actually, that
it's
was
biggest guy in the room will take what he wants when he wants, and that seems to be a Donald Trump
Can
thing.
I, because Cameron brought it up, this peace board for Gaza, is Vladimir Putin the right guy for that board, Scott?
Well, we've have to be in the United Nations with them, and we have to be on the United Nations Security Council with them, which I don't love that they get vetoes over us in the United Nations Security Council. So I guess we have to deal with them. Do I love it? No, but they're already part of the UN. They're already
Would
part
he
of
be
the
one
UN
of your
Security
top 5 choices?
Top 5 choices? No.
10. 20.
You know what sounds like it should be in the top 10 choices is a Palestinian person, which does not appear on this peace board. And that's how we know that Donald Trump's alleged ceasefire, which the state of Israel has violated countless times, by the way, is just a facade. And
You're going to let the aggressors in this war onto the peace board? I don't think so.
Who are the aggressors in this war?
Hamas, the Palestinians, Hamas, that invaded Israel, that raped, murdered, kidnapped, and tortured the Israelis. That
Are you
took
claiming right
hostages,
now that the state of Israel has never committed rape, torture, or murder against innocent Palestinians? Can you make that claim?
The entire reason we had this war is because of October the 7th. So, no, I don't think they should be invited to be on the peace board until they, I don't know, demilitarize and do the rest of the things they're supposed to do.
I don't know if they're exactly on this peace board, but there is a group of Palestinian leaders, technocrats who've been named to assume some role to bring forward the leadership and the implementation of the peace agreement in Gaza. I'm not saying we should all be sanguine about how that's going to go. I don't know exactly where it stands, but there is a group of individuals who've been named. So I think that's a positive step.
The question is
go ahead.
The question is if they're named, can they pay the $1 billion entrance fee to be in the club? Because that's the price.
Well, I don't think the Palestinians are being
play.
asked to pay that, but the pay
That's
to
the
play
pay to play for this board.
$1 billion to join. All right, next, the Department of Justice investigating a group of anti-ICE